Okay, so for part 2, we're going to start with our examples. I do want you to remember that we are still following the order of operations. So you need to go down through those list of things like we did in class yesterday, but the difference today is that you're going to have some positive or some negative values. Okay, so here we go. All right, so following order of operations, for each of our parentheses, we're going to look and say, do we have one number? And you can see, obviously, that we do. The next thing we're going to check is, do I have an outside power? And you'll notice that in each side of the parenthesis to the right-hand side, there's no number shown. The third check is you have to look in front to say, is there something attached to that parenthesis that's going to change what's inside of that parenthesis? And if there is, then you have to take that action. If there's not, then you can just drop the parentheses because they're just protecting the negative. And in this case, notice that in front of all of the parentheses, each individual one, there's only a plus, which means everything is going to stay the same. It's a positive 37, added to that it's a negative 11, added to that it's a negative 15, and added to that a negative 18. Now, because the sign of a term is in front of it, what I'm going to do at this point in time is again, because I don't like to subtract, am going to group all of my negative numbers together. I'm going to add all of these up, negative 11, negative 15, and negative 18, to get one number of negative 44. Once I have that one negative number, the only positive I had was this 37. So now I have an equation or an expression, that's written as negative 44 plus 37 or 37 plus negative 44. So we're going to subtract because our signs are different. And as I subtract the old-fashioned way, we get 7. The larger absolute is negative. My final answer is negative 7. In our next example, we're going to do the same thing. We look at our parentheses. There's one number inside. There is no outside exponent, but notice in front, for each of these parentheses, there's subtract. So it's saying, what's the opposite sign of a negative 6? The opposite sign of a negative 8? And whatever you say is what you write. So the negative 19 comes down, the 17 comes down. The opposite sign of a negative 6 is a positive 6. Notice that's what I wrote. And the opposite sign of a negative 8 is a positive 8. Now we're down to all addition or subtraction. So the only negative I have is 19. The 17, the 6, and the 8 are positive. So if you add these, whether you keep it horizontal or vertical, you should end up with positive 31. Now our signs are different, so we're going to subtract. The larger absolute is 31. And as we subtract, we end up with 12. And because 31 is positive, my answer is positive 12. The next problem that we have, we're going to still follow order of operations. The order of operations says you need to get one number inside of the parenthesis. So 17 take away 7 is 10. There is no outside power, but in front there's this 5, and in fact it's a negative 5 that's being multiplied to the 10. So negative 5 times 10 is a negative 50. Notice that I'm writing what I say, and that 10 just comes down. I'm not adding anything else in at this point in time. So now if I look at this, I have a positive 10, but I have a negative 50 because the sign of a term is in front of it. So my signs are different, so off to the side I'll go negative 50 and positive 10. And because my signs are different, I have to subtract my numbers and keep my negative sign for an answer of negative 40. It is critical that you remember that the sign of a term is in front of it. In the next example we have, I'm going to walk you through it. Take the steps as I verbally go through, and then we will do this out together. So inside of the parentheses, you need to get one number. Inside of the brackets, you have to get one number. Whether it's addition or subtraction, whatever the operations are, you've got to get one number inside of the brackets. Notice outside of the brackets, there's no power. You look in front and you take your one answer from the brackets and multiply it to the -5 outside. And get one number on the top, which is what the fraction bar says you must do. Moving to the denominator, get one number in the parenthesis. There's no outside power. And in front, the negative says take the opposite sign of that. The last thing you're going to do is take the top divided by the bottom and see what you get. All right, let's look at this and see how you did. I'm going to start and I'm going to go vertical here as I work to get one number in the top. First action that you had to take is to get one number in the parentheses. 7 plus 2 is 9. Now there is no outside power of that parenthesis, and in front there's a subtract, which says the opposite of a positive 9 is really a -9. That is a -9. Now whether you go 3 plus a -9 or whether you see that specifically as -9, it means the same thing. Ultimately our signs are different here. So as I continue on, I have to subtract the numbers. So -9 plus 3 is a -6. Signs are different. Subtract and keep the sign of the larger absolute. And then lastly, we're going to multiply because there is no outside exponent. We're going to take -5 times -6 for 30. In the bottom, 9 take away 10. Signs are different, so we subtract. And inside we get a -1. No outside power, but here this subtract in front, or negative, however you see it, says what is the opposite sign of a -1, which is a +1. And because it's one number, it carries the remaining of the way down. Last step, 30 divided by 1 is 30 for our final answer. In our next example, I'll talk you through again as well. And then remember, we have our two self-check examples that we have. So in our next one, we're going to get one number in each of the parentheses. We're going to look for an outside power outside of the parentheses, which there are none. And then we're going to look directly in front. Now in front of the second parenthesis, we have a bracket bar, which means you can't do anything. But in the one parenthesis inside of the bracket, there's a number that you need to multiply to it. Then you need to get one number inside of the bracket. And then lastly, you have to multiply the single number of the bracket to the single number of the parenthesis for your final answer. Remember to pause the video as I'm going through this just quickly to kind of get you through it, to move at your own pace. Pause the video when needed. So the first action that we're going to take following order of operations is we're going to get one number inside, and 1 plus 4 is 5. In the second parenthesis, remember that the sign of a term is in front of it. So it's a -8 and a -5. So our signs are the same, so I'm going to add the number and keep the sign. Now going back to the bracket, because I have to get one number there, I'm checking for an outside power and there is none. So then I ultimately have a -5 times 5, which gives me a -25. And remember that I write what I say. The next thing that I have to do is I have to get one number inside of the parentheses. So 64 take away 25 is 39. Now as we look at these two multiplication terms, the two that are being multiplied together, it's kind of a fairly large number, a little bit larger than I normally would ask of you. So I'm just going to take it off to the side, show you old-fashioned multiplication. So 9 times 3 is 27. Carry the 2. 3 times 3 is 9 plus 2, which is 11. Leave your space. 9 times 1 and 3 times 1 gives me a final answer of 507, but with one negative, my answer is negative. So in the next example that we see, what we're going to do is to self-check it. Pause your video right now, try the problem, then compare it with my answers. Here we go. What we have to do is get one number in the parenthesis. This first one is all set, so I'm just going to keep it as is. But the second one, I have a -3 and a -7, so the signs are the same. And again, remember that the sign of a term is in front of it. So I'm going to add the numbers and keep the sign and get a -10. As I look at this problem and go back to the bracket, there's no outside power. but in front there's a subtract that says, what is the opposite sign of a negative 3? And I write what I say, which is a positive 3. Inside of this parenthesis now we have one number, no outside power, but in front there's the subtract that says, what's the opposite sign of a negative 10? The answer is a positive 10. Going back to our brackets now, we need to get one number inside. I have for our signs here a negative 1 and a positive 3. Signs are different, so 3 take away 1, which is 2, and the 3 is the larger absolute. So it's a positive 2 inside. From there, no outside power. In front, opposite sign of a positive 2 is a negative 2. The 0 in this problem is really not important because it's not going to change our answers. So notice I have a negative 2 and a positive 10. So signs are different, so I'm going to subtract the numbers, and I get 8. And the larger absolute is the 10, which is positive. So my answer is positive 8. In the next and final example, again, pause the video, try it, and then compare our answers. Following order of operations, we're going to get one number inside of the parentheses. First parentheses we come to is negative 9 divided by 3, and I'll keep it in parentheses. So 9 divided by 3 is 3, 1 negative for a negative. I have one number in the second parentheses, so I'll keep that as is, and then I also have this negative 1/3, which is a single inside. So that part is met. Now I have to work to get one number inside of the bracket. So with that said, there's no outside powers, so I just have to multiply these two together. So negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12. From there, I'm going to take this and I have to do all multiplication and division next. Notice that these two are divided. And anytime you have a divide with a fraction, you need to make everything a fraction. And I'm just going to take that 1/3 out of the parentheses. And I'm going to keep the 12 over 1, but I'm going to change the division to multiplication. And I'm going to take the reciprocal, so I'm going to flip the fraction that follows. Then I'm going to multiply straight across the top and get 36. And straight across the bottom and get negative 1 for a final answer of negative 36 for just that piece. Now as I'm building on this, I have the 36 that we had before, plus that negative 36 that I just got for a final answer of 0. So this concludes our lesson today. Be ready for a daily check-in and to work with positive and negatives tomorrow in class.